Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening up a topic that I think essentially constitutes the collective trauma of an entire generation of web developers.
Oh, I know exactly where you're going with this.
You know the feeling. You spend weeks building this beautiful, pixel-perfect interface. It looks incredible on your laptop. You feel like an absolute genius.
Oh, yeah, we have all been there.
And then the client opens it on their phone, or worse, some random Android tablet from like 2018. And it just looks like a bomb went off.
Yeah.
The menu is floating in the void. The text is unreadable. Images are overlapping.
The classic, well, it worked on my machine scenario.
Exactly. And for the last, 15 years, the solution has been to play this endless game of whack-a-mole.
Right, you add a breakpoint for the iPhone.
And you fix the iPad.
And then a foldable phone comes out and just ruins your entire week.
But the stack of research we are looking at today suggests that this era of the rigid breakpoint is effectively over.
It is. We are seeing a fundamental shift in the philosophy of front-end architecture. We are moving away from responsive web design as we traditionally knew it, which was very much about control and snapshots, to something called intrinsic or fluid design.
Intrinsic design. It sounds a bit metaphysical almost.
It is a little bit. It is about letting go of control. It is about accepting that you just cannot control the canvas anymore.
Well, to help us navigate this letting go process, we have a really comprehensive stack of sources today. We are pulling insights from the Every Layout project, which is effectively the Bible of modern CSS layout.
Highly recommend that one.
We've got the mathematical breakdown of typography from Utopia. We have the actual production guidelines from REI Co-op's Cedar design system, so we get some real-world application in there, and a look at the state of CSS landscape for 2026.
And I think the common thread across all of these is actually pretty simple. Stop micromanaging the browser.
That is the mission for this deep dive. How do we stop fighting the layout engine and start, mentoring it?
That is the perfect distinction right there. Mentoring versus micromanaging.
So let's start with the villain of the story, the old way. Why was the pixel-perfect mindset, specifically the way we use media queries, such a trap for you?
Well, think about the history of it. Early web design was just trying to mimic print.
Right.
In a magazine, you know the page is exactly 8.5 by 11 inches. You have absolute control. So when we moved to the web, we tried to impose that exact same rigidity. We standardized on these magic numbers.
Oh, man. 124 pixels.
Mm-hmm.
Or 768 pixels for the iPad. I remember memorizing those numbers.
We all did. But we treated the web as a series of static canvases. The research from Every Layout calls this the snapshot flaw.
The snapshot flaw.
Yeah, you design a snapshot for mobile, a snapshot for tablet, and a snapshot for desktop. And then you write code to enforce those three highly specific states.
But the web isn't static.
No, it is a continuum. The problem is that a user screen might be 769 pixels wide, or maybe 1001 pixels wide.
Yeah.
If your code says do X at 768 and do Y at 104, what happens in the middle?
Usually something really ugly. It is that uncanny valley of layout.
Exactly. The design breaks in those liminal spaces between your breakpoints.
Yeah.
And the maintenance burden, it is horrific. There was a great anecdote in the source material about a redesign where simply changing the gutter...
The white space between grid items?
Right. Simply changing that gutter space required editing code in 6 separate media query blocks.
That sounds like a total nightmare. You change one margin and you have to ripple that change through 6 different versions of the site.
And keep in mind, that was before 2026. Think about the device landscape right now.
It's endless.
We have foldable phones that change with instantly when you snap them open. We have smart displays on refrigerators, massive ultra-wide monitors. If you try to write a specific rule for every single one of those scenarios, you are fighting a losing battle.
You would just be writing code forever. So the alternative is intrinsic design, and this term was coined by Jen Simmons, right?
That is right. Jen Simmons really pioneered this thinking. The core idea is do not define the size of the content based on the screen. Define how the content behaves and let the browser calculate the size based on the space available.
Okay, that sounds great on a bumper sticker, but how do we actually do that? Because developers, we like control. We like knowing that a headline is going to be exactly 32 pixels.
The tool set has changed to allow this. And the biggest game changer, the one that kept popping up in every single source we looked at, is the CSS function clamp.
Clamp. I have seen this in code bases, but I feel like a lot of people just copy-paste it without really understanding the power of it.
They absolutely do. It effectively replaces lines and lines of complex math and JavaScript listeners. Think of it as the Goldilocks function.
Okay, walk us through the Goldilocks logic.
So clamp takes three values: a minimum, a preferred value, and a maximum. It is like telling a child playing in the backyard, you can run around anywhere you want, that is the preferred value.
Right.
But you cannot go past the fence on the left, the minimum. And you cannot go past the fence on the right, the maximum.
So applied to typography, you aren't saying make this font 16 pixels.
No, not at all. You are saying, I want this font to be at least 1 rem, so it is actually readable. Ideally, I want it to be 5% of the viewport width, so it grows as the screen grows.
Yeah.
But if the screen gets huge, cap it at 3 rem so it doesn't look like a massive billboard.
And the browser just handles that math in real time.
Instantly. As you drag the browser window, the text scales smoothly, just like water filling a container. There are no jumps. You know that jarring effect on old sites where you resize the window and suddenly the text snaps from tiny to huge?
Yeah, the pop. It's so distracting.
Clamp kills the pop. It is totally fluid.
Yeah.
And you write exactly one line of code to cover every single device from a smartwatch to a living room TV.
But does this work for everything? Or is it just for font sizes?
Oh, you can use it for anything. Padding, margins, widths. Imagine a content column that is usually 50% of the screen, but never gets smaller than 300 pixels and never wider than 800 pixels.
So you just write clamp 300px, 50%, 800px.
The pun.
That is incredibly efficient. But it does require a completely different way of thinking. You have to be comfortable with fuzzy values.
You do. You have to trust the math. And actually, speaking of math, that brings us to the Utopia project. This was one of the densest sources in the stack, but honestly the most fascinating.
Utopia. Sounds very grand. But it is essentially about harmony, right?
It is about modular scales.
Right.
This is a concept from musical theory and classical architecture, but applied to pixels.
Because I think for a lot of developers, picking font sizes is just pure guesswork. Like, let's make the header 40 pixels, maybe 42.
Precisely. And that leads to a messy, disjointed feel. Utopia says, pick a ratio, a strict mathematical relationship, for example, the golden section, which is 1.618, or a perfect fourth, which is 1.33.
So every font size is just the previous size multiplied by that specific number.
Correct. It creates a predetermined scale. But here is the fluid twist that Utopia adds. They recognize that a ratio that looks incredible on a desktop often looks terrible on a phone.
Right. If you use a huge ratio on a phone, your main header is going to take up the entire screen. It is just too aggressive.
Exactly. So Utopia allows you to interpolate between scales.
How does that work?
On a mobile phone, you tell the browser to use a minor third scale, very conservative, very tight, like a 1.2 ratio. But on a desktop where you have acres of white space, you shift to a perfect fourth or golden ratio for that dramatic high contrast look.
But wait, you just said we aren't writing breakpoints anymore? So you don't write a breakpoint that
Yeah.
says switch from A to B?
No switches. The browser calculates the slide between the two. It generates a variable, say, step 0 for your body text and step 5 for your main headline. Those variables automatically adjust their value based on the screen size using complex clamp formulas that Utopia generates for you.
So you just drop in step 1 or step 2 in your CSS, and mathematically it will look harmonious on literally any device.
It guarantees rhythm. It totally removes the subjectivity. You aren't guessing pixels anymore. You are designing a system of relationships.
I love that so much. It is systems thinking versus pixel thinking. Now, we have to talk about layout next, because fluid text is nice, but if your sidebar is smashing into your main content, you still have a completely broken website.
True.
And this is where I feel the biggest revolution has happened in the last couple of years. Container queries.
This is the holy grail, and I do not use that term lightly. Front-end developers have been begging for this since, 2010?
So for the uninitiated, what is the fundamental difference between the media query, which we have used forever, and a container query?
It is entirely a matter of context. A media query asks, how big is the viewport? It is looking at the entire browser window. A container query asks, how big is the box I'm currently sitting inside?
That sounds like a subtle difference, but the implications are huge.
It completely decouples the component from the page layout. Let's look at the REI Cedar Design System example from our stack. They talk about a classic product card. An image of a tent, the title two-person dome tent, and a price.
Standard e-commerce stuff.
Right. In the old world, you would use a media query. You would say, if the screen is wide, desktop, put the image next to the text. If the screen is narrow mobile, stack them on top of each other.
Sounds reasonable enough.
But what if you want to put that exact same card in a narrow sidebar on the desktop version?
Ah, I see. The screen is wide, so the media query fires and says expand, but the sidebar itself is tiny.
So the content smushes together, the text overlaps the image, and it looks totally broken, even though you are on a desktop screen. The component is dumb. It doesn't know where it actually lives.
So the component is blindly following the screen size, totally ignoring its immediate surroundings.
Exactly. With container queries, the component does not care about the screen. It looks at the sidebar container and says, oh, I only have 300 pixels of space in here. I'm going to stack vertically. Then you take that exact same code, drop it in the main content area where it has 800 pixels, and it says, hey, I have room. I will go horizontal.
And this just happens automatically.
Automatically. REI is using specific units for this, like call-i container query inline units. So instead of saying width 50 VW, which is 50% of the view part, you say width 50 CY, which is 50% of the container.
That makes the components truly portable. You can drop them anywhere in your layout, a sidebar, a footer, a modal, the main body, and they just work.
It changes how we architect teams, too. You can have a dedicated team building a library of components that are totally self-aware. They don't need to know where the implementation team is eventually going to place them.
It feels like we are finally fulfilling that old promise of write once, run anywhere.
But I want to pivot to something that often gets overlooked when we talk about these fancy new tools: resilience and accessibility.
Yes.
Because the research from Dig Systems pointed out that this isn't just about aesthetics. Fluid design is actually a massive accessibility requirement. It is a non-negotiable part of professional development today. And often, the old-school rigid coding styles are actually creating massive barriers for users with disabilities.
One of the specific criteria they mentioned in the source was zoom reflow. This is the WCAG requirement, where a user bumps their browser's zoom up to 400%.
Right. Many visually impaired users don't use a screen reader. They just zoom in heavily on the visual interface. And when you zoom to 400%, the browser effectively simulates a very, very narrow mobile screen.
And the source pointed out a very specific bad habit that breaks this: fixed large margins.
Yes. Imagine you are designing a beautiful landing page. You want it to feel airy and premium on a 4K monitor, so you set a margin top of 150 pixels on your main headline.
Which looks great on the 4K screen.
Sure. But when that user zooms into 400%, their viewable vertical space might only be 300 pixels high in total. That 150 pixel margin is now taking up half their entire screen.
Oh, wow.
They have to scroll and scroll just to find the start of the text. Or worse, it pushes the actual content right off the side of the screen.
So how does the fluid mindset fix this? Do we just stop using margins entirely?
No, we use intelligent CSS. The function min is your best friend here. Instead of just saying margin top 150px, you write margin top min, open parenthesis, 150px, comma, 15 vep.
VH being viewport height.
Correct. So you are basically telling the browser, I want 150 pixels. But if 150 pixels turns out to be more than 15% of the screen height, stop there. Just give me the 15%.
That is so clever. So on the big screen, you get your premium 150 pixels. But on the zoomed-in screen, you get a nice proportionate gap that does not eat the whole view.
Exactly. It adapts. It is resilient to whatever the user's settings are. Another major area DeKeck focuses on is focus visibility. We cannot talk about accessibility without talking about the outline.
The blue ring. I feel like for a decade, every designer's first step was setting outline to none because they thought the default browser ring was just ugly.
Which is an absolute disaster for keyboard users. If you are tabbing through a site and the focus ring is hidden, you have no idea where you are. It is literally like trying to use a mouse with an invisible cursor.
And the expert guidance here was pretty strict. Do not rely on the browser default.
Right, because browsers just use heuristics. You don't know what background color your element is sitting on. If the browser DRL is a blue ring and you have a blue button,
It's totally invisible.
exactly. The standard now is to use outline offset and ensure you have at least a 2-pixel thickness with a 3:1 contrast ratio.
It is about being explicit. Like, I am designing the focus state, not just leaving it up to chance.
And one last accessibility piece that fits perfectly into this fluid philosophy is user preference. Specifically, the media query prefers reduced motion.
This is the one that checks the user's system settings, right?
Yes. Some users get severe vestibular motion sickness from parallax scrolling or heavy zooming animations. They can set a flag right in their operating system to reduce motion.
And the source was very clear on this. This does not mean make the site boring.
No, it is not about removing delight from the experience. It is about physical safety. The recommendation is, if that flag is set, change your animation duration to something nearly instant, like 0.01 milliseconds.
So the state still changes, the menu still opens.
But the whoosh that causes the dizziness is gone.
It is just polite.
Polite is the perfect word. It is software that actually respects the user's physical needs.
Now, zooming out, pun intended,
Mhm.
I want to touch on a syntax change that confused me at first, but now I think is pretty brilliant. We are seeing the death of left and right in CSS.
Ah, logical properties. This is the big move towards true internationalization.
We have spent 20 years writing margin left and padding right. It is just muscle memory at this point. Why change it now?
Because left and right are physical geometric locations, but the web is global. If you write margin left 20 pixels for an icon, it looks perfectly fine in English.
Yeah.
But if you translate that site into Arabic or Hebrew, which are right-to-left languages.
The text flips, but the margin stays over on the left side.
Exactly. Now your margin is on the wrong side of the icon. It looks completely broken. You have to write a separate overwriting style sheet just to fix it.
So what is the new syntax then?
We use start and end. So margin inline start. In English, start is left. But in Arabic, start is right.
So the browser just handles that flip for you automatically.
Automatically. If you use logical properties, you can localize your entire site into a right-to-left language, and the layout basically mirrors itself perfectly without you writing a single extra line of CSS.
That is the very definition of future-proofing.
It aligns the code with the actual logic of the content rather than the physical geometry of the screen.
So we have covered the philosophy, the math, the accessibility. Let's look at the actual toolbox for 2026. If I am starting a brand new project today, what am I using? We have a list here from the sources of awesome CSS frameworks.
It is a really interesting mix of the old guard and what I kind of like to call the rebellion.
The giants are still standing, I assume.
Oh yes, Tailwind is still everywhere, Bootstrap is still kicking. But they have adapted. They have native support for logical properties and container queries now. But the really interesting movement is toward classless frameworks.
Classless, meaning you literally don't write CSS classes.
Right. The prominent example in the stack is pico.css. The idea is HTML is already inherently semantic. An H1 tag means header. A button tag means button. Why do I need to add class equals BTN primary, BTN LG just to make it look like a button?
So with Pico, you just write a plain HTML button tag.
And the framework styles the tag itself. It makes it responsive, accessible, dark mode, ready all automatically.
That sounds incredibly refreshing. Just pure HTML, no clutter at all.
It is fantastic for blogs, documentation, internal tools. It really pushes back against the overwhelming complexity of modern front-end development. It says, hey, the browser is smart now. Let's just give it good HTML.
And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, I saw XP.CSS on the list.
Yes, if you want your website to look exactly like the Windows XP operating system.
Or NES.CSS for the 8-bit Nintendo look.
Which just goes to show that even though we are talking about serious things like fluid scales and vestibular disorders, the web is still a creative canvas. People are still having fun out there.
And honestly, having these powerful layout tools makes the fun stuff easier to build. You aren't fighting to center a div anymore.
We finally figured out how to center a div.
It only took us 30 years. So let's bring it all together. We started with the frustration of the whack-a-mole breakpoint system. Where have we ultimately landed?
We have moved from a mindset of controlling pixels to creating systems. The big takeaway here is that pixel perfection was always a myth. We just hallucinated that we had control.
We were designing for a reality that just didn't exist.
Exactly. The goal now is resilience. A resilient site handles unexpected content. It handles a user zooming into 400%. It handles being shoved into a tiny sidebar container or stretched across a massive 80-inch TV.
Right.
And it does all of this gracefully, without the developer having to manually write a specific rule for every single scenario.
It feels like we are finally working with a medium of the web, instead of constantly trying to force it to be a printed magazine.
That is the key shift. The web is fluid. Our designs absolutely should be too.
I love that. So here is a thought for you to take away, listener. We have been talking about CSS this whole time. But this philosophy, setting boundaries and rules instead of micromanaging exact outcomes, is pretty powerful.
Very true.
It strikes me that this intrinsic mindset applies to a lot more than just code. If we stop designing for specific outcomes and start designing for constraints, allowing the result to adapt naturally to its environment, what other problems in tech, or even in your own management style, could be solved by setting a few Goldilocks rules and just letting the rest figure itself out?
Wow. That is a deep question for a CSS discussion.
Hey, we call it the deep dive for a reason. Thanks for listening, everyone.
See you next time.